Hey everyone, I'm Mark, and now that the VR experience for Flight Sim 2024 is a lot more stable, I thought it might be a good time to look over the basics of setting up a Quest 3, from how to connect it to configuring Flight Sim for a stable experience in the simplest way possible. The approach we're going to look at today is with the link cable, which works well for me, but keep in mind that you might have a different experience because VR is highly dependent on your setup as a whole. For that reason, it's very hard to give a single recommendation on the best way to set up the Quest 3 since there are so many factors at play, but the link cable approach is a relatively inexpensive and easier way to get started. The first decision that you'll have to make, of course, is which cable to get, and there are a ton of options available to buy, from the official cable, which comes in north of $100, to cheaper third-party options as well. I haven't had any issues with a third-party cable, but one thing that you'll want to consider is the kind of port that it uses to connect to your computer, since you need the right one to be available. Meta's official cable is a USB-C to USB-C cable, and it's fairly common to only have one or two of those available on your PC, so if those are already taken and you don't have a USB hub, it might be easier to look at a USB-C to USB-A cable. A USB-A cable gives you more flexibility, but if you go in that direction, make sure that you're plugging it into a USB 3 port, which you can tell by looking at the logo since it should have a double S at the end of it. With the link cable sorted, the next thing that you'll need to do is install the link application on your computer, which is fairly straightforward and you just leave all of the defaults. But that brings us to a common issue that many Quest users seem to have. For some reason, once you shut down and restart your computer, the next time you try to start Link software, it has a tendency to not want to load up again. But luckily, there's a solution that you can follow to fix that, and I'll have a link to a post in the official forums that can help you out with that. The only setting that I want to point out in the Link application is in the graphics preferences, because this is where you can set the refresh rate for the headset, which I've left at 72 Hz. That means the image in the headset can update itself up to 72 times per second. And to reduce any stuttering, in an ideal scenario, your FPS in Flight Sim would match the refresh rate. Now, hitting 72 frames per second is a tall order, especially in VR, so what we're going to do in just a little bit is aim for half that number instead, so 36 frames per second, and that's going to make it easier for the headset to keep the image smooth since it's a factor of 72. Once you've installed and started up the Link software, make sure that you've got your headset on and powered up. Plug it into your PC, and at that point, it should prompt you in the headset to enable the link to the computer. It takes a few seconds to load into theater mode, but from here we can set up our desktop screen so that we can use our computer like we would normally, but just with the headset on instead. If you look down from here, you'll be able to see all of the Quest menu, and what we're looking for is on the right-hand side here. This option is going to allow you to select and bring up your computer screen in front of you. From there, if you want to move the desktop screen around because it's too close or at the wrong angle for you, you can always move it to your liking by aiming at the bar that's under the window, holding the side button, and then using the hat switch to move it around. With that where you want it, we can launch Flight Sim just like we normally would, and while that's loading up, we can set up all of our hardware that we plan on using during the session. One neat feature, if you need to see the real world around you to set up all of your physical devices, what you can do is double tap the side of the headset, and that'll put you into pass-through mode, letting you see the world around you thanks to the cameras on the front of the Quest. This is also super useful if you've misplaced something and you can't find it by feel, and it works at all times actually, even when you're in the middle of flying. Once we're loaded up, we're going to start a flight right away just to get some basic bindings done and out of the way. What I recommend is to start a flight in a spot that's pretty tough on your system, because if we manage to make it run well there, you're going to be good to go pretty much anywhere else. Right now, we're still in Meta's theater mode, but to swap into VR mode, what we've got to do is go into the settings, and then from here, we'll go all the way on to the right in the VR mode page, and from here, we'll be able to customize all of the VR bindings. I've set it to use Control Shift to swap into VR mode because it's a combo that's easy to find since it's right at the corner of your keyboard, but you can change it to anything else that you want as well. If we swap into VR mode now, the first thing you'll be prompted to do is to set your default seating location. So make sure that you're sitting in the right position and the right direction that you want to fly from, and then hit the keybind that it says to set it. I've overridden it to use the Control Caps Lock combo because, again, it's just easy to find by feel. And if you want to change it on your side, it's the camera reset option in the bindings page. Now, once we're in VR mode, we'll likely still need to access the toolbar from time to time, be it for the weather menu, cameras, or anything else. And to bring it up, I found that mapping the toolbar toggle to Control Tab works quite well. One thing you'll probably find yourself missing when you're in VR mode is being able to access external apps like SimBrief, Navigraph, or Beyond ATC, and you unfortunately can't make those Windows apps visible natively in the VR environment. What I do instead for Navigraph and SimBrief is to use the tablet integration that they provide, which makes you feel even more immersed anyways since you stay in the VR environment. Beyond ATC have a toolbar that you can install separately that'll give you a way to access it from inside Flight Sim. But if there's anything else that you want to see, like virtual airline software or Volanta, your only choice is going to be to swap out of VR mode, do what you need to do, and then swap back into VR mode. Now it's going to be time to set up our graphics, and to be clear, this won't be a deep dive on performance and what all the different settings do. It's really just meant as an easy way to get you started that worked well for me. Let's start with anti-aliasing, since the option you pick here has a big impact on the clarity, the readability, and the performance that you're going to get. If you've got a slower GPU, DLSS can help you squeeze out more performance from it than the other anti-aliasing options, but it does come at a price because by default, digital instruments can be smudgy and hard to read at times. That's changed a little bit with the release of DLSS 4.5 in the last few months, but it's a bit beyond the scope of this video to look at how to configure that. However, there are plenty of guides online on how to do it. So if you're sticking with the default DLSS version for now, it's really best with planes that have a more traditional round gauge cockpit like the C-152 or the Black Square lineup of planes. Those extra GPU resources that DLSS frees up means that you can bump up some of the other settings a little bit more though, which is why I suggest if you're just starting out with VR to give it a go at a plane that'll work well with DLSS to start. The alternative to DLSS is TAA anti-aliasing, and it looks the best in all situations, and especially for glass cockpits. So if you're flying a glass-heavy plane, it's the best option, but you might have to compromise on some other settings because it is a lot heavier. I did a deep dive on how DLSS and TAA work a few months back, so if you want to understand more about those options and how they work, you can go check that out since it's a whole discussion unto itself. The max frame rate option relates back to our discussion earlier about the refresh rate of the displays in the Quest 3, which we've set to 72 in the Quest software. And since our goal is to achieve half of that, I've set this here to 36 FPS. If you're using a refresh rate of 80 instead, you'd want to pick 40 here, but the higher that you go, obviously the more resource intense it's going to be, and you may have to sacrifice on some of the detailed settings that are below. Personally, I find 36 to be more than enough for a smooth and consistent experience, which is why I'd suggest starting there unless you have a really top-of-the-line machine. What's important to remember is that in VR, more frames doesn't actually mean things will be smoother. It really comes down to matching the refresh rate of the lenses, and it's actually better to stay closer to half the refresh rate than to be somewhere in the middle between the two. Similarly, we want to make sure that we don't go below 36 frames per second, and the easiest way to achieve that without having to install any third-party add-ons or tools is to enable the dynamic settings option right here. What dynamic settings does is it changes two of the most impactful settings in terms of performance, the terrain level of detail and the object level of detail, so that it can maintain the frame rate target that you tell it. What that means is if you're targeting 35 frames per second and it can't achieve that number with the TLOD and the OLOD that you've specified, it'll back off those values to achieve the target. When Flight Sim first launched, dynamic settings was very aggressive in how it backed off the LODs and frequently caused blurry textures because of that, but I've found that since Sim Update 3 that it works quite well to get started with VR. The real question, of course, becomes what should you use as your starting point for the TLOD, the OLOD, and all the other settings? And what I'd say is to start higher and then back it off as needed to get a smooth experience. I have very average specs, and I found that starting with the high-end preset actually gave me the best looking world possible, and with the dynamic settings on to back off the TLOD and the OLOD, it kept the smooth and consistent experience that I was looking for. In fact, all of the footage from Flight Sim that you see in this video was recorded with these settings that we just went over, and as you can see, it works pretty well without having to fiddle too much with the settings. If you're struggling to get a smooth experience, the settings to try dropping first are going to be the terrain level of detail and object level of detail, the shadows, the clouds, and the trees, since those are some of the most taxing on your system. You'll never be able to get the same level of detail as on a regular screen, but you can still experiment with different combinations of these settings to find an experience that you like the look of. The level of immersion that VR provides more than makes up for the lower quality rendering of the world, and most importantly, you have to find settings that have no stuttering because it's even more jarring when that happens than on a regular screen. There are of course a bunch of other things that we can do to optimize our experience, like updating the DLSS version, tweaking things in the Oculus debug tools, and even using third-party apps like Auto FPS, so let me know if you'd like to see those in a follow-up video. If you learned something useful today, please make sure to like the video and subscribe so that you don't miss out on the next one.